Melissa and Brian, I'll let you go on stage and start. All right, see you soon.
Sure, great. So I've got the slides here up, and I think that's a good way to do it. Melissa, I'll just forward the slides, just tell me when. I'll start by just saying welcome. My name is Brian Benz. I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft, and I'm here with Melissa. Melissa, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself as well?
Hi, yeah, definitely. I am Melissa McKay. I currently work for JFrog as a developer advocate. I've been with them for a little over 2 years now. And prior to that, I was a developer, so very much involved in all the processes and all of the work that developers do, getting our code managed and delivered out there into production. So excited to work with Brian today to show you this demo.
Cool.
Yeah. We're going to be, talking about the concepts, of course, DevOps concepts, including the landscape, artifact management, especially. That's the part that I'm going to be talking about the most, dealing with Artifactory and how you might want to manage your external dependencies, things like that. And then the second half of this will be Brian's demo. Next slide, please. Once again, we're going to get started here. This is just our agenda that we're going to be working with. Okay, so the very first thing I want to talk about is just what do we really care about when it comes to our processes and mainly our pipelines, our development pipelines and our deployment pipelines. And this is a picture of my car. I actually showed this picture the last time I presented over maybe 2 years ago now. I can't remember, but I just wanted to show it again because I am still driving this car. And I show it because for a couple of reasons. One, it's an old car. It's a legacy car, so to speak. And two, I did get in a little fender bender. And instead of paying the money to do all of the body work and fix this particular vehicle, I instead went online to Amazon and bought a magnetic Band-Aid. And that was the best $12 I've ever spent. I like, solving this problem in this way. So I think we need to consider carefully the, how practical we are being with our processes, with our pipelines, with our development teams. Focus on the things that we actually care about, and those might be predetermined. Those might be determined by the budget of the project, for example, time constraints, various other things. These are items here that I've listed. Do you want your pipeline to be faster? Are you struggling with making sure that your environments are being set up quickly, that you're able to deploy quickly, that you're able to test quickly, all of that. Second is efficiency. How much time and effort are you putting into, your processes to get your software out into production? Next, reliability. Do you need to focus more on making sure that your code is tested appropriately, that it goes through all of those stages, that you have the appropriate gates that your application must go through before it can be successfully deployed to production? The last one is economical, and I already touched on this one. How are you, with your resource usage? Are you storing a bunch of stuff in the cloud? Remember the old days? I'm going to date myself a little bit here. Remember the old days when we paid for every text that we sent on our cell phones? These are things that we need to consider now, at least temporarily, and maybe this will change in the future, but we're paying for every byte of storage now. And these are things that we need to consider, especially as we move a lot of our processes to the cloud and a lot of our artifacts and everything being moved to the cloud. This is a slide that it's very busy. I don't expect you to be able to read much of this. I just show it to show how overwhelming this landscape can be and all of the tool sets involved. Everything that that is involved in your process from beginning to end. So at the very, very beginning, we're going to discuss where we focus on dependency management. That is what I'm going to be focusing on today. And there's several places in our pipelines where we need to pay attention to where we're getting our artifacts from. The first step is during development, active development, when the developer is involved in making sure that everything is coming into their local machine. So this means reaching out to, remote repositories, public repositories like Maven. There's a question earlier about, Spring, like how much is Spring represented in Artifactory? And I think that's a big question. But what I like to teach people is how to deal with their artifacts and their third-party dependencies that they're pulling in general. So on a local machine, the very first thing you do is you pull down your source code, you build that source code, and pay attention during that build process where your dependencies are coming from. So of course, Spring is a large framework. You need a lot of things to be pulled in generally from Maven Central. And what we teach is not only, once you pull those items in, you really should store them as they are. Keep them in your own private registries or repositories, whatever makes sense for you. This is going to be something set up like Artifactory. But whatever tool you use, make sure that you are managing those dependencies. This will help you troubleshoot in the future if you need to upgrade a particular dependency or you need to eliminate one entirely due to some vulnerability. These are all things that you can control with artifact management systems like Artifactory. So the next thing a developer does is push any code changes up to source control, and it would be nice to be able to trigger a build right then on a build server. Now, once again, that build server needs to have access to the dependencies. Are they using the same dependencies, the exact versions of those dependencies as they were in local development? That's something that you need to consider in your build servers. Make sure your build servers are connected to your artifact management system as well, and that your build servers aren't constantly reaching out to public repositories to pull these artifacts in. We often like to build projects without cache in order to make sure that we have repeatable builds. This means it's more important that you manage those repositories and make sure that you're getting the version you expect. Next, moving along on that pipeline, you finally get to deployment, and deployment is where, you need to deploy your final artifact. Well, where is that artifact coming from? That's another reason to focus on paying attention to your artifact management system. So we go through all of these stages, these that I talked about. Obviously, there's a few steps in between here, but these are the ones that we'll be focusing on today. So development, we talked about that. Continuous integration in your build server, we talked about that. And then finally, delivery and deployment. As you go through each of these stages, make sure that you're paying attention to your original objectives. Are you fast enough? Are you efficient enough? Reliable enough? Or economical enough? These are metrics that you need to have in advance so that you know when you are doing well and when you need to find places in your pipeline to improve. Okay, let's go ahead and see this in action. I'm going to pass this off to Brian Benz. He's going to give us the actual implementation of these details. And Pat, giving you the stage, Brian.
Cool. Thanks, Melissa. Sorry, I dropped out for a second there, technical difficulties, but I'm back. So what we're looking at here is a simple Spring Boot application. This is what we call BIT. It's our developer advocate mascot at Microsoft, and it's a beta feature. So basically, BIT is being displayed here, and I've got it linked to something called a feature. It's actually called App Configuration. But it's also used, the term is used interchangeably with Feature Manager. So if I go into Feature Manager in Azure and I turn that off, whoops, it can connect to the service. It's just being coy. There we go. If I turn that feature off and I go back out here and I refresh this a couple of times, there you go, BIT's gone. Then I can turn that feature back on. So you get the idea. It's a feature flag, and you can actually control the application from inside the application using something external, an external switch that you turn things on and off. So that's the concept behind feature flags. Now, what else we're looking at here? This is the Azure Portal. So portal.azure.com you go to. And You can sign up for free trial if you don't have one already. Otherwise, you're probably already familiar with this. I've got my portal organized into dashboards. So different dashboards for different events. You might organize it a different way based on your organizational needs. But for me, I've got this application here called JD-Conf Test, and that's what we just looked at. Let me zoom in a little bit here. And JD-Conf Test is an Azure App service, and it's totally scalable. In fact, I bumped up the scaling just for this presentation. This square here is called a resource group. So a resource group is where you organize all your stuff. So the first thing I do to actually create this application is I go in, I say create a resource. I go to web app, and I put in a web app name. Oh, first I pick my resource group, the one I just showed you, DevOps for Java Shops. I put a web app name, let's call it May the 4th, because we have, oh, it's not available. Okay. There we go. May the 4th is available. Okay. So .azurewebsites.net, it has to be unique. And then you can select a runtime stack. And of course, no surprise, we have .NET. We also have Java 11, 17, and 8 that you can use. I'm going to use the embedded web server, but you could use Red Hat, Apache Tomcat, etc. I know my region here is West US 2. As you can see, there's plenty of regions to choose from. When I go to deployment here, what I can do, this is the cool thing about this web app, I can enable continuous deployment. And this reaches out to my GitHub repos, and it checks to see which organization I want to use in GitHub. Then it loads all of my repos. I pick the repo that I want to use here, which is called DevOps for Java Shops, Test Azure, Test AB, nope, Test Feature Flags, JFrog, there's the one. So I can actually create this on the main branch. And what this does is it actually generates some YAML. So if I go here, you can see the YAML it's going to generate. It's going to push this YAML up to my GitHub repo as a GitHub action. And on push, it's actually going to activate this. So every time there's a push into this repo, it's going to activate this particular GitHub action. Now, this is a GitHub action that's a generic action, and it's actually going to fail. And the reason it's going to fail, and the reason why I like to show this demo, is because I'm connecting to a service. You know, you can show a typical Hello World demo that everyone's seen standalone, but I like to connect to something because it's more real world, right? You might have a database, you might have something in this case, you've got a feature flag. So the feature flag connects, and you need a connection string to add that feature flag. So how do you actually add the connection string? I'm just going to close this because I already created one. We don't have a lot of time for this demo, so I already pre-baked this. Hope you don't mind. If I go into my repo here, there's a couple of things that I've actually updated. And here's the actual workflow that gets created for this. I added an environment variable here, which is a connection string. And the connection string, let me zoom in on that, is in my secrets. And I'll explain what a secret is in a minute. So the secrets actually connects to that connection string. You also have down here during the build with Maven step of this particular action, you do a Maven package and you refer to a settings.xml. And you have to pass the username and password for Artifactory as well. So this is another great demo because it shows how you can actually connect to an external service from your GitHub action, in this case, Artifactory. This is obviously you don't want a username and password put in something that's publicly available on your repo, right? So the way you fix that is you go into settings, and down here in secrets under actions, there are several secrets that we've set up. So this particular one is the connection string, first of all. That's the one I had before, and that's a secret connection string that I put that comes from that feature manager that I showed earlier when you click on and off that little checkbox. All right, then the host and the password for Artifactory and the username. And this is the published profile. So this automatically gets generated when you connect this to an app service. So that process I showed you about creating the web app, that actually creates this published profile. And that is a token basically that connects your GitHub repo to your Azure, connects your GitHub repo to your Azure web app. So that's secrets. The other thing we do, if I go into this one, is we have a settings.xml. Now the settings.xml would also have some information that you don't want to necessarily pass, sensitive information that in this case, username and password again. So you can use Artifactory username and Artifactory password. And if you recall, the reason why you can use these and the host, the reason why you can use these is because if I go back into my workflow up here, you can see that I actually created those environment variables. So this time it's not a secret, it's an environment variable. So I set up the environment variables, Artifactory username, pull it from secrets, password, pull it from secrets, and host, pull it from secrets again. And then basically after that, the build goes, and because the connection string and the published profile are working here, it creates a target jar file, app.jar. And from there, you can pick up a deployment task, which passes that jar file to your Azure web app, puts it in the right place, and runs the web app. If we look at the web app behind the scenes, jdconf test.scm. So there's, past tends to be a little bit of a black box, but we do have a way inside of Azure Web Apps to have access to some settings and some information in there as well. So hopefully it comes up. Let's try refreshing that again. Usually it's pretty quick. Yeah, welcome's not registered. That's fine. Here it is. So you can, for example, you can look at your www root file, and you can see that the app.jar is there. And you can actually download this and run this in applications or whatever. You just need to have that connection string as an environment variable as well. So that, in a nutshell, is how we actually build this application. And if I refresh it again, I enable that feature, so bits back. And that, in essence, is how you do it. So you go in, you generate the automatic YAML. Then once that YAML fails, because the first time it doesn't have the environment variable set up or the other string set up, you go in and update your YAML file for the workflow and your settings XML with Artifactory data. Once you've got all that and it runs, you can actually see in here, this is my JFrog platform, all of the artifacts that automatically get stored in Artifactory for me. In this case, we're using a snapshot, but there's a snapshot and a release. So releases are with Maven, things that you release into production with a version, and then the snapshots are by date. So there we go. That's basically how you set that up. I do also have inside of this repo, we'll share this link afterwards. Inside this repo, I have something called a provided GitHub workflow, which actually has everything that I've described set up, pre-configured for you. All you need to do is change this published profile when it automatically gets generated, and then I have an automatic settings XML here. And of course, as I mentioned before, we're using secrets, so the settings XML and the workflow don't have that sensitive information in them. All right. That's basically the demo. Melissa, do you have anything to add to that, or do you want to point anything out in Artifactory?
I guess one thing that is confusing for a lot of folks is understanding exactly where these artifacts are coming from. So when you're using open source, which we all do, because none of us want to totally reinvent the wheel, right? We want to be smart about that, and we want to build bigger and better things. So we're constantly, using libraries that we are aware of or that we're familiar with. Spring is a huge one. So what Artifactory does for you is it provides you a proxy. So when you need to collect those artifacts, it will proxy that request out to Maven Central. And that's what Brian is doing today. He set up, his project to point to his Artifactory instance. But when he asks for an artifact that Artifactory doesn't have yet, and he's pulling that out from Maven Central. That initial request is pulling that artifact in from Maven Central, and then subsequent requests are going to pull from that Artifactory instance. There's several reasons to do that. There could be performance reasons for doing that, also security reasons, especially if you are behind a firewall or something like that and you don't have direct access to the internet and those public repos.
Absolutely. One thing I'll show you here just real quick in Artifactory. It's so easy to set this up. So you set up your Artifactory repo, then you say set me up, and there are two things you can do here. Which is just basically, let me go back to Maven quick. What'd I do? I lost it. Maven. All right, so there's a deploy, and the deploy gives you a little snippet to add to your pom.xml, which basically points to things. And this I created a secret for. And then configure here actually generates a settings.xml for you automatically. And it has usually your password and stuff in here, but not in this one. And then I put those in secrets as well. But I've already actually created that in the settings.xml. Once you've got all that set up, it just goes straight to Artifactory whenever that runs. As Melissa mentioned, if there's an update to any of those packages, they go into your repo, and otherwise they don't. That's it.
All right. Melissa, Brian, thank you so much for this awesome session and demos. It was beautiful to see a lot of YAML code. Thank you for that.